James was still on and he was switching us over to live. Welcome to the Wellbeing Show. I'm your host, Noel McDermott. I'm joined tonight by Sue Groner, who's joining us from over the pond, and we'll introduce her properly in just 1 second. But first of all, just to say welcome back to the Wellbeing Show, and hopefully this evening we won't have me dropping out and having my guest taking over as host, which is what happened last week. But there you go, evidence that it's a live show. And on that topic, as it's a live show, it'd be great if you joined us with your thoughts and comments. We're streaming on 3 different platforms at the moment. So on Facebook Live, on YouTube, and on Twitter via Periscope. So if you're on any one of those platforms, be really cool, drop us a line. My team are having a look at the comments, and if you've got any questions or comments, then send them through. They will message them to me on WhatsApp, because I'm an old dinosaur that can't do too many things at the same time. So my team sort of prompt me. And on that note of WhatsApp, you can contact us directly on that. +44 7506 319 745. That's +44 7506 319 745. That's enough of all that. So hi, Sue, welcome. How are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Great. Great, because today we had a little bit of sunshine in London, and sort of I've come back from the continent and seeing my son. So I got back to London on Sunday, and it was cold and grey and wet in July, and I was like, there's something wrong here, you know. And but today we've had some sunshine, so it's good today. You're over in New York, aren't you?
I am.
Tell us about that. How has it been over there, particularly?
Well, it's been really rainy too, and kind of gloomy today. We got some sun also, but it's hot and humid and not great. But that's summer for you.
You're not in the city of New York, though. You're in the state.
Yeah, I'm out. I'm in like what would be considered the suburbs of a little town called Bedford.
Okay.
And, but spent a lot of time in the city also.
Yeah. So how has it been? I suppose the last year we've been asking people. We saw in London, we were sort of watching what was happening in New York City itself. I guess mostly Manhattan, but in the wider New York, and thinking, look, very familiar tone in terms of the pandemic and the people banging their kettles and things like that. And
yeah, that happened at the beginning. Like, you know, last March, New York got hit so hard. You know, New York was the first place to get it, unfortunately. You know, as it moved west, you know, states didn't really heed the warnings, and it just got bad to worse. And then California had it really badly. And, you know, and then by that point, things started to lighten up a little bit in New York. And, you know, it's been pretty good lately. It's almost like everything's pretty much back to normal.
Well, I think Cuomo, he's your governor, isn't he? He's the sort of person in charge, but he's not he's not a trumpeter, is he? He's sort of science-based and follows the evidence.
Yeah, thank goodness.
And did all the stuff that you need to do to sort of...
Yeah, he did a good job. He's not the greatest guy in the world, but he did a very good job with this.
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of accusations about him at the moment.
Yeah.
Very sad.
That's a whole nother
conversation, which we can actually talk about. I mean, we can go wherever we want in this conversation, because I think all of these topics are relevant and part of the experience. But these days, I think just in terms of the pandemic, things seem to be managed now. You're in a similar place to us, I think, in terms of opening up.
Yeah, I think the hardest part now is for people to readjust to going back to the office. I know there are a lot of especially moms who are really concerned about having to go back, even if it's on a hybrid schedule, just dealing with, you know, childcare again. They've kind of gotten used to being home and liking it. Partly, you know, there are also a lot of problems that came with that, but I think that that's a really big hurdle. The companies really have to learn to be a little bit more flexible and understand. I think a lot of companies are a lot more aware now of what really goes on as a parent, and when you're parenting 24/7 and you're working at home and you're around, like, it was a lot, and you're trying to, help with school and a lot. And, it's good for me because I do a lot of work with companies and to just help their employees who are parents, learn these skills and strategies to not be so stressed out. And, now companies are recognizing that really is a thing.
Yeah. I mean, I suppose my sense is the cat's out of the bag, isn't it, in terms of home working and productivity? There were so many old white fat blokes like me running companies saying, no, you have to come in because I'm paying the rent on this really expensive building, so you damn well will turn up.
Yeah.
But the cat's out of the bag in terms of all the arguments about, well, we can't, it's too complicated, we can't manage you, all of that sort of stuff. It's like we've had to do it this last year. And I think particularly for parents, and sort of I'm thinking, people I know who are senior sort of managers in solicitors firms, very successful people, all of that, who are saying, I'm not going back into the office. I've really, it's been great to be at home, not perfect or ideal, but my connection with my family is better. I can manage my life more effectively, and I don't have that stressful commute.
Right.
And so they're looking at, for themselves, hybrid ways of doing these things. So maybe going in for a day or two, but spending a lot more time at home. Is there a similar move over in the US?
Yes. I mean, it's funny that I forget what the company was. It's a pretty big company. It might have been like a Google or company like that, where they said, why don't you guys, they had people come in and consult with them and said, why don't you, you up for trying a 4-day work week? 1 day at home and 4 days. And they're like, absolutely not. That'll never work. And then all of a sudden, people were working from home.
Yeah.
Period. Yeah. And they're like, okay, yeah, maybe in September or next year, you can start coming back to the office. So
yeah. I mean, it's interesting. I don't know if there's a similar experience there. Just before we get onto it, though, I just want to sort of vaguely introduce you properly, rather than just jumping into a nice conversation. You're a specialist psychologist working with parents. You specialize in supporting parents.
I do. I'm not a psychologist. I'm actually a mentor. But my focus is on parents, is really helping parents to be happier and more relaxed, to kind of learn the simple strategies to reduce the everyday stress and anxiety that inevitably comes from being a parent. But no one's exempt from that.
Great. And we're going to get into how you sort of got into this. I just want to reflect as well the way you sort of corrected my terminology, because that's always a sign of safety in somebody's work, is that they understand what the professional boundaries are, what the services are that they offer, and don't make claims one way or another. Mentoring is an extraordinarily important role in terms of supporting people. Often can be more effective than people with loads of professional titles behind them, simply because there's more of a lived experience and maybe more a sort of sense of we're working side by side. I have mentors in my companies who are crucial in terms of supporting people in ways that maybe professionals find difficult to do, or sort of, there might be a block in what they're doing. So thanks for that. And it's a good sign of, you can trust somebody if they're very clear about their boundaries, really. So.
Yeah, well, I think it's really important, and I don't venture to places where I'm uncomfortable either. Exactly. And I'll recommend, I think you need to go to someone above my pay grade for particular things.
It's also, I think there are those spaces where people need support, but not necessarily a clinical intervention.
Right, not a clinical, and also not the business model that a therapist or a psychologist uses. I'm not someone you need to see every week for unlimited amounts of time. I mean, I'm very helpful with what I do, but it doesn't it's not an ongoing weekly
Yeah.
thing, 3 to 5 sessions and you're pretty good to go. And if it's through a company, I usually do like monthly workshops, and then we'll have like weekly office hours and people can pop in and, or pop on when they have a question or just want to learn a little something.
Yeah, no, I get that. I mean, it's a really positive, supportive model. We have a thing in the UK, a sort of framing of interventions, which we call stepped care. And the idea being, if you imagine a set of steps going up, it's the level of intervention, if you like. Each step is a higher level of intervention, not higher in terms of better, but more of an intervention. And actually, the evidence is if you can find the lowest possible step that's the most effective for somebody, you're going to get better outcomes long term, because you don't have the problem of learned helplessness and dependence and all that sort of stuff, and you're closer to people's lived experience on an everyday basis. And so the 10th step, maybe the top step, would be hospitalization, and that comes with so many problems, that sort of institutional approach. Very, very quickly, people have become de-skilled and become helpless and dependent, and patients. They become a patient. And with the approach that you have, people don't become patients in that sense. They become collaborators and peers, I guess.
Yeah.
And
it's not, this is everyday stuff, but it's hard because, when you're in the thick of parenting, you're in the thick of it. You don't have the time to really think about and analyze and come up with, well, how else could I have handled that? And what should I do in the future? And you're just trying to get through the day. And, I certainly made plenty of mistakes, when my kids were younger. They're now 21 and 24. But I joke that I have the benefit of the retroactive crystal ball. And so now I look at my kids and I'm like, that worked, that didn't. I can't believe I wasted time worrying about this or that. Or, I've watched how kids evolve. It's like such an amazing thing. But when your kids are little, you worry about what's happening now. You worry about, you kind of take that thing and you project it onto your kid as an adult. And you're like, well, wow, if I don't fix this now, then this is what they're going to be like as an adult, and I won't have done my job. And of course, we know none of that's true. So,
so how did you, I'm interested to know, how did you get into mentoring parents? It's an interesting choice, actually, and I'm intrigued as to what the story is.
Well, I've done many, many things in my life, including, for a while I was a stay-at-home mom, and I loved it. Of course, I was involved in other projects and did a lot of development work for nonprofits, but I really loved being a mom, except for a couple of years when my kids were like in middle school. Those were really hard for me. And after that, I started to see how they changed and grew, and people would come to me and just say, hey, this is going on or that's going on, or whether it was my physical therapist, I was saying, he was telling me about his young child, or I'd meet someone in a coffee shop and we'd talk. And I'd always say, well, have you thought about talking to them this way? Or have you thought about doing it that way? Or why don't you ask them this or that? And like, first of all, it was like, oh, really? Like, it was almost like, oh, I didn't know I could do that almost. And then I would ask for feedback, and everyone would say, you're really good at this. You're better than our psychiatrist, and you're better than this one and that one. And people then started to say, you really should turn this into a business. And the timing was right for me. I was going to be an empty nester soon. And so I went for it and I did it.
Great. And now, how long have you been in the business now? How long have you been doing the mentoring?
Almost 5 years.
Great. Well done, you. And you're saying you're being an empty nester, and then the pandemic comes, and everybody who had empty nests suddenly had them very full of those.
For me, that was such a joy.
Was it?
Well, I had my 2, kind of adult children living at home. Like, for me, having a family dinner whenever we could was like the greatest thing in the world for me. It was kind of sacred. And now all of a sudden we were having family dinners every night. And not only that, my daughter, who loves to cook, finds it relaxing. She was making us, gourmet meals. And my son kind of took on the role of cleaning up, and now he still does. He just wrote for him, which is awesome. And he's also a pretty good cook. So he was helping, and sometimes we'd all cook together, but we'd sit and we'd drink some wine and have these really nice dinners, and we respected each other's space during the day.
Yeah.
I was very aware of the fact that, my kids were used to living on their own, and all of a sudden here they're coming home, and they were probably just as anxious as we were. And we actually sat down when they got home and realized, well, we have a nice size house. And, we were having all of a sudden, like, our housekeeper who came once a week wasn't coming, and there was a lot to do. And so, using one of my suggested techniques on myself, we sat down and we made a list of everything that needed to be done, from the grocery shopping to vacuuming to laundry to food, like everything. And then I'm like, you pick what you want to do off this list first, and then we'll just go around. And you know what? And it worked. It wasn't perfect, but it was pretty darn good.
Right.
And all the things that I worried that, the house was going to become a disaster and no one was going to be doing anything and I would be the nag, and like, that didn't happen. And that's
great, actually, because that is like a very common technique when adult children come back into the home, is you have to contract into how you're going to live together. You can't assume that you're going to go back to the way it was when they were kids, when they were young. I mean, they're still your children, but they're adults, and they need to sort of carry that responsibility as well. They can't just come back and dump all the dirty clothes on you, and sort of get on with it. So
yeah, in fact, I always recommend that they should never do that.
Absolutely. Always kids, get them involved. So it was an organic sort of approach on your part that you discovered, that you enjoyed doing this. You said that was a couple of years when your kids were in middle school that you found challenging. Are you okay to talk about that? What was challenging for you?
Well, my daughter was, and actually still is, a procrastinator. I think she's kind of come to the conclusion of where that's all come from. And, right. She's quite a smart little cookie, and, always kind of set the bar really high and set others' expectations really high for her. And so her fear of not meeting those expectations have always been sort of an issue for her. And, fortunately, she's working on that. But I tried everything, and I knew that when she would procrastinate, it would cause her a lot of stress when the time came to really having to do things. But I also learned that it was completely out of my control. Right. I wasn't going to be punitive about it. The rewards didn't work. It's just who she is. And she did really well in school. So she figured out how to make it work for her. Probably not pleasant experiences, but that's who she is. And when she was ready to start working on it, that's when she chose to start working on it. And she said to me, I wish I had started, maybe I should have started in college. And I'm like, you know what? It didn't bother you enough in college.
Yeah.
And you managed really well in college. And so it only works when it really matters to you, I think.
Yeah.
And
it's a really tough lesson, though, for a parent to learn what the boundaries of the role are, because that's what you've just described to me. You sort of struggled with knowing what the boundaries. You weren't there as a mum. You're not there as the rescuer. You're not the sort of magician who can fix everything, and you're there to support the natural course of development of your kids. And you sort of learned that. But it's a very, very difficult lesson to learn, particularly if you see your kids struggling.
Right. And you know what? But I learned too that if we don't give our kids the opportunities to struggle, they're never going to learn they're not going to develop coping mechanisms. They're not going to have problem solving skills. They're not going to become resilient because they're not going to have anything to be resilient from.
Yeah. So tell me what you mean by resilience. I think some people mistake it as meaning you artificially create horrible things for your kids so that it's good for them. This is good for you if I beat you up. It's not what you mean.
Yeah, right. And I always say, like, don't create the situations, but come on, we all know they're going to happen. And it could be that your kid forgets their cleats one day when they're off to school. And, as especially the maternal instinct, I think for moms, like the maternal instinct has evolved way past what it should be. And so that is like, oh my gosh, I not only need to protect my child from like imminent physical danger, but I need to protect them from sadness and worry and disappointment and frustration. And no, that so instead, and it causes us stress when we think about our child being in distress, however little that is. And so we jump to want to fix it. And all of that causes us more stress and anxiety. But I'm like, let's look at that differently. Okay, so my child is now going through a little distress because they left their cleats at home, which means without those cleats, they don't get to practice, which means if they miss practice, they may miss the game because that's the rule that the coach has, right? So I could think, no, I've got to rush those cleats to school. God forbid my child should miss practice and miss a game, and then they won't, play on some fancy team when they're adults, which of course no, doesn't happen anyway. And if they were that good, then it wouldn't really matter. So
I'm sure the coach would have found the cleats if they were that good, right?
Yeah, exactly. So so anyway, we look at that and say, look at those cleats and say, you know what? This is an opportunity for my child to learn to become more self-reliant, right? How does my child learn to remember to bring their cleats to school from now on? And problem solving, and dealing with the disappointment of what may come. And that's the coping mechanism part. And the resilience comes with, I got through this experience. And every time I get through an experience like this, it makes me a little bit stronger and it makes me know that I can do that. Yeah. And so when parents say, oh, I just want my kids to be happy, my response is, how about I just want to know that my kid can handle being unhappy or frustrated or disappointed, whatever those things are, that my kid can handle adversity. Yeah. If we know that, and we send our kids out into the world knowing that they can handle whatever ups and downs life throws at them, and no one's exempt from that either, then we can kind of take a deep breath and know that we've done our job. And so I always say, like, ask yourself, if I bring this thing to school, if I call this mom and say, why isn't my kid invited to the birthday party? If I'm, what you call the snowplow parent or the lawnmower parent, if I'm always trying to either prepare things so it's smooth for my child, or if I'm always trying to fix everything, so God forbid my child's always, so they're always happy, I'm not doing my job as a parent. Yeah. And then all of a sudden you can feel so much better about being that parent.
Well, no, I totally agree. But from your perspective, what do you see as the core task then of the parent? If it's not to fix everything, what is the role of a parent, do you think?
Oh, I think it's to guide them to becoming resilient, to learn how to problem solve, to learn how to, to help develop those coping mechanisms, to learn self-reliance, and not by throwing them to the wolves, but having a conversation, saying and validating how they feel, letting them know that whatever that adverse emotion is, it's okay. It's normal. You're disappointed you didn't get invited to that birthday party. I don't blame you. Of course you're disappointed. That's a normal feeling to have. I don't like it when I don't get invited to a birthday party. But if I call that mother and get my kid invited, Or I say, don't worry, honey, we're going to go do something even more fun that day than that party would have been. I'm defeating the whole purpose, because the party will come and go. It's the 15 minutes of fame. It's that it'll come and go. And then you kind of talk to your child and say, hey, remember how disappointed you were? You should feel good about how you handled that. Yeah. And the next time something comes up that's disappointing to you, remember how you got through this.
There's a really really interesting writer. I don't usually recommend books because I think it's a bit sort of like, how clever am I? All of this stuff. But there's an interesting book called The Importance of Disappointment, which when I first came across the title, I went, that's really strange. I mean, what's important about this? Why would you think disappointment? And essentially the guy was saying that with young children, very young children, if you don't disappoint their magical expectations that you'll meet all their needs, they will never grow. They won't develop a mind. They won't be able to identify that they have needs. So they won't learn how to communicate those needs once they've identified them. And it's a bit like this. If you sort of, again, with a very young child, if you think about a situation in which you don't allow your child to get out of the nappy and learn to use the toilet and learn to wipe their own bum, and they're still in a nappy at the age of 25, have you really done your job?
Figuratively.
Exactly. Yeah. Then, do you think then you've done, is that your job, do you think, as a parent, to sort of to infantilize and stop the development of your child?
So, oh my God, not at all.
Right. I think you're right. There is a sense, I think, that modern parenting has so many pressures placed upon it to narrowly guide their child to certain types of experiences, to get the good degree, the good school, and the parents are responsible for so many. Where does this pressure on parents come from, do you think?
Oh my gosh, it's such a good question, and I've been asking not only myself, but I had the good fortune of running into Malcolm Gladwell. Do you know who he is?
Yes, I know the name.
Yeah. He's written a bunch of books, but he really takes like a situation like that and he'll delve deep, and really he's fascinating, great writer. And so I invited myself to sit down with him.
Good.
Being that kind of person. And
Malcolm, you don't know me, but you will do.
Yeah. And I said, I'd actually emailed you a while ago and you didn't respond. Right. I said, I asked you about this question and we had this whole conversation, and he's like, well, you're the parenting expert. You should do it. And I'm like, no, but I'm not a researcher. That's not what I do. But it was funny because he wondered too. And it got me thinking more and more that over the years, I think the more that activities became businesses.
Okay.
So, football and travel football in England, right? Or soccer for us, like became a big business. Travel sports became a big business. Dancing became, from taking dance classes and a recital, it became to dance teams. And then you had the opportunity to get on that travel team or get on the best travel team, and the whole pressure of and competition and parents comparing themselves to other kids' parents and on and on and on. And so that led me to think, you know what? And then I say this all the time, parenting is not an 18-year engineering project.
Yes. Good. Well said. That's a really nice way of saying it, Sue. Thanks for that. I might steal that from you. Definitely.
But it's so true. I mean, because that's what we as parents kind of think is our job without sitting down and really thinking about it. And, as well as I do, you cannot engineer another human being. Yeah. And when you do, and you start trying to, you end up disappointed. Your child is unhappy. There's tons of conflict. Yeah. And it's like you're just spewing out orders to your child and expectations to your child. And what a horrible way to grow up.
Yeah.
And what a horrible way to be a parent.
Yeah.
The stress of the engineering project not working is not a good one.
Yeah.
And so that's why I always go back to, instead, let's raise these kids who are resilient, who have good problem solving skills and coping mechanisms and resiliency. That's where it's important.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's interesting to think about maybe the different cultures that exist. I mean, there's, what was it? I can't remember which writer said the UK and the US are two countries separated by the same language, and which is an interesting way to think about it, because there are quite significant and distinct cultural differences. So I think in the UK, there's much more of an assumption that the state will be involved in some way in families and children, and whereas in the US, I think people would be horrified if the local authorities were involved in things like that. Very much parents are left to their own devices, and the assumption is your family is sacred, your space, you control it, and you're responsible for it. Is that correct?
I mean, there are, of course, social services and, things like that.
It tends to be reserved, doesn't it, for problems well thought of, and it's, I mean, our child protection services, similarly, people don't, they don't want child protection services coming in. But
right, yeah.
We have things like CAMS, child and adolescent mental health services. We have support teams in schools. We have children's centres, children's development centres, etc., etc. So there's much more of an infrastructure which provides for that saying, that saying, it takes a village to raise a child.
And I mean, we do have that more than we used to. I mean, there definitely are child development centers, and, it's definitely more for the underserved populations in the country. And so that's great that, that they have those, and they have charter schools, and, there's definitely the movement is getting stronger and stronger.
But I guess the sort of the groups of people that you're working with, say the middle class parents, as we would call them, they're not involved in those services, are they?
No.
The US?
No, I mean, my clients, at least my private clients, tend to definitely, skew affluent. But that's, within the companies, it's everything.
Yeah. And so I get the impression in the US, and I talked to this on the phone when we were having our quick chat, research chat, that sort of your culture around children is quite different in the sense of parental culture. The parents in the US, broad brush strokes here, but of course everybody has their own styles, but there's an assumption of parents having the authority and children being respectful and that sort of stuff. I mean, like in the UK, for example, we see these films from the US where a child says yes sir to their father, and we all in the UK we go, what?
Oh, I do that too. No, that's that's very not rare. Maybe if you're in from a couple of southern states, you might do that, but that's not normal.
But is there quite a lot of pressure on parents in the US?
Yeah, I think too, what's interesting is, I think back when I loved my parents dearly, but they weren't my friends and I didn't want to hang out with them. And I think, raising our kids, we loved hanging out with them, and we had fun with them, and we still like hanging out with them, and they like hanging out with us. Like it's a different relationship now, which is good, I think, really good. But, I think the way that parents used to parent was much more out of, the kids were respectful and behaved because of fear and because of punitive actions. And, we don't do that. Or a lot of us don't do that. I'm
smiling because I'm remembering conversation with my mother died a long time ago of cancer. And I remember sort of talking to her, and I knew she was dying. I said, one of the things I'm most sad about, Mum, is that there isn't going to be time for us to become friends. And she just stared at me and she said, I'm not your friend, I'm your mother. Okay, right, that's it. You are fine. That was my experience of that's what parenting was. And
yeah, I mean, and listen, I have a mother who's 87, and I kind of feel like I'm her mother instead of her daughter, and I'm always kind of, I don't think she learned those skills of resilience. And, every time a little something goes wrong now, like she kind of wants me to fix it, which, I didn't fix it for my own kids. I'm not fixing it for my mother, but I'm validating a lot. I understand how you feel. That's got to be really hard, and with our own kids when they go through these tough things that, I'm definitely not the suck it up type of parent. Wow, that's got to be really hard. What a bummer. That sucks. Whatever it is, let me give you a hug, which helps a lot. And then, like, when we do that, we need to learn to shut up. Yes. Like, that's it. Not, well, why don't you do this?
It's the most difficult skill.
Right?
Shut up and don't do anything is the most difficult skill to learn, without a doubt.
It really is. Like, because we are coming from a place of love. We're coming from a place of experience. And so, yeah, I know how you feel, and this could help fix it. But then what are we doing? We're now fixing and giving suggestions, and the older our kids get, the less they want unsolicited advice. And so they don't want it. I mean, my daughter said to me when she was a junior in high school, early on that year, she was trying to figure something out, and we had been talking about it, and I came up with this great idea for her. And I went into her room and I'm like, Victoria, I have this great idea. And she's like, Mom, stop. And she's like, I'm not going to do it. It's like, if you tell me it, I will not do it because I want to figure this out by myself. Like, she was so crystal clear, and it was so great for me. It was really helpful. Like, that was like, aha.
Okay, brilliant.
You got it.
I'm just thinking about my boy. I dropped him off at a summer camp thing on Saturday. He's 10, and he was looking up at me and saying, I'm really anxious. I don't know these people. And I'm like, yeah, I get it. But part of me wants to go, right, I'm coming with you. I'm going to make sure it's all okay. I'm going to make them be your friends and be really nice to you. But that motivation, I don't think is really to help him. It's actually to help me, because I'm finding it difficult to deal with my difficult feelings. So I want to take action. And I did that classic thing of just embarrassing by hugging and kissing him. When he's 10 and he's grown up now, and you don't do that in front of my friends, thank you very much, but I'll be doing that for the rest of his life. So I think that's tough luck.
You know what? A lot of people would want to say to their kid, oh, I know, or they would say, oh, don't worry, you're going to make friends right away. You're going to have the best time. Don't even worry. And then you're saying, don't feel that way.
Exactly.
And when you tell them don't feel that way and they feel that way, that, I think, as a total layperson, is where a lot of anxiety comes from, because you're now doubling down on the feeling. So, like, I'm worried and I feel anxious about being worried because my dad or my mom said, don't feel anxious. You shouldn't feel that way. Yeah. And yet I do. So is there something wrong with me?
I mean, I think that's right. And we call it in therapy, it's called normalization. We normally on a daily basis have uncomfortable feelings. And that's just part of life. And if we don't have uncomfortable feelings, something very weird is going on. And so I totally get with you on that one. I think there's also something about, I think, maybe you and I as adults in conversations, we get it. When I might say I feel uncomfortable about something, you can say to me, oh, don't worry about it. And I can be assertive and come back at you and say, well, actually, no, this is how I feel. It's important for me to represent myself as an adult. But of course, a child can't do that because they don't have the emotional maturity, and neither should they. And that seems to me something that is important that a parent can do, is being able to contain their own needs and focus on their child and go, well, where is this young person at? And have some trust for them, I guess, is what you're saying.
Yeah, and just let them know, like, give it a try. Like I always say, after you do the validation, it's possible to say, hey, do you want to brainstorm some ideas together? Instead of saying you should do this, or why don't you do that, or this is this is the tact you should take. Say, hey, what do you think? If something happened and they're up for a conversation, well, what do you think you might do differently next time?
Yeah.
Let's give it a try. Why don't you give it a try?
Yeah. Yeah. I'm wondering because it's almost like you, in that approach of not allowing the child to normally experience life and those sort of things, and be there to hold them when they come and need that emotional support. It's almost like we're trying to tell them that making mistakes, getting things wrong, all of these things are somehow bad things to do, whereas we intellectually know that if you don't make mistakes, you're not living, really, are you? You're sort of you're avoiding life.
I feel like, and there's so much conversation about allowing our kids to make mistakes and allowing for failure. Yes. Yet I don't like that language, because failure and mistakes just sound really bad. There's no way to really spin those words into sounding good. But the spin for me is, I like to call it all trial and error.
Yeah.
Right. So like trial and error assumes there's going to be a number of stages you're going to have to go through, that it's not going to work out the way you wanted to right away. And you're going to have to keep going back. And I mean, to me, life in general is just all trial and error.
Yeah. Yeah. And so tell me about, typically, if somebody was to come to you, typically what they might come to you with, and how you might support, and the type of approach that you might take with them.
Yeah. So if I'm doing a private session, usually if there's two parents in the household, I encourage both of them to be part of the session, because I think being on the same page is really important. Yeah. And it's better for them both to hear it through me, as opposed to one reporting back, because then like they're being taught and told, and a lot of people don't like that. And they'll tell me what's going on. It could be one child, or it could be the whole family. It could be the structure of the way their things are happening. It could be the way a parent feels of the concern. Kids aren't getting their things done. No one's listening. My child doesn't seem interested in any activities. My child's not getting along with her friends. My kids are fighting constantly. I can't deal with the mornings. I can't deal with the night times. I hate being, the one who's the warden. I call it the warden. Like, I really like to help parents stop being the warden, whether it's the homework warden or the screen time warden or the food warden or the sleep warden. Like, that's a sucky part of being a parent. No one likes it. And we shouldn't take on that role. Yeah. We should teach our kids to learn how to do those things themselves. Mm-hmm. And we're usually we just want the result right away. You asked for a half hour of screen time and you didn't get off, I expect you to be off in 30 minutes. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't work that way, and I can be yelling down to my kid, 25 minutes, you have 5 more minutes, 1 more minute, better get off that thing now. And I can be the one in charge of doing that and hate it. Or I can say, you know what, if my kid goes over 5 or 10 minutes for a week or two, it's okay. Nothing's going to change in their life or their life trajectory, except that I'm going to allow them the process of learning how to monitor their own time. Sure. And then it's the trial and error. Let's talk about this. You want the privilege of screen time? Then you have the responsibility of managing that time yourself. Sure. Let's talk about some ways that you might be able to do that, because I know it's hard. I know when I get involved in a game on my phone, it's really hard. I can't believe how fast the time has gone. It's hard for me to get off it. I'm not paying attention to the clock. I'm sure that's the way it is with you too. Let's come up with some ideas. Here are the ideas. Which one do you like best? Which one do you want to try first? And then you say, okay, great, let's try it. Let's reconvene in a week. And then, you know what? How do you think that worked? Well, I definitely went over. It was really hard for me, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so yeah, I kind of noticed that too. Want to try something else on that list? Or do you want to tweak that? Or what do you think? Or, and they may say, well, Mom, what do you think? Do you have any ideas? And then I'm happy to give a suggestion. But it's so respectful.
Yeah.
And it's so important. I have this little method called CLEAR.
Okay.
It stands for communication, love, empathy, awareness, rules, and respect. And that last R, that respect, is a hurdle for us as parents, because we grew up, I'm the parent, I tell you what to do, you listen to me, I'm your elder, you respect me, and that's that. But it doesn't work. It's never worked, except that we were scared. And so when we respect our kids, that they have good ideas, that they have the ability to learn things without us constantly monitoring and yelling and pushing, and that they hear us and we want to hear their thoughts and ideas. They're part of the family then. They feel like, I think it opens up communication in a huge way. And I think that's so important.
I 100% agree. Sorry, I just managed to hit my computer. I was so excited about my next question. There you go. But it's interesting that, for me, it's interesting that you work, I think, almost exclusively with the parents. You don't involve the children themselves.
I don't involve the children. No.
Why is that? I mean, I guess I could guess, but I'd like to hear it from you. Why is it that you only work with the parents?
Well, like I said at the beginning, I'm really parent focused. This is about these strategies. Ultimately, I mean, they're great for the kids, but ultimately they're helping the parent to get rid of all that stress and anxiety that they have. It's giving them new ways of thinking about things, new ways of approaching situations, new ways of thinking, well, how does my child feel? That's like the awareness piece, like if I was 7, how do I think the 7-year-old feels about X, Y, or Z, instead of how do I feel as an adult about how my 7-year-old should feel? It puts us in a very different position. And all of a sudden, like, the edge comes off. It's so great to watch my clients when they're coming in, like, and all of a sudden you can see this like deep breath, kind of this heavy weight off their shoulders, like, oh, A, this isn't so bad. And B, I can do this. I can do this and I can be happier. And the more I practice this, and the more we get into the rhythm of this is how I treat my children, and this is how we talk about situations that, are uncomfortable or difficult, or, my kids aren't doing their chores and I have to constantly nag them about it. So how am I going to approach that? And so we sit down and we kind of go through the steps, and, it's never 100% perfect, but, that's why we have more than usually a couple of sessions, and we tweak too. It's the same thing, try this, then we tweak. And then eventually you learn how to do this on your own.
It's lovely because sort of the way I'm hearing it, and you tell me if I'm missing it, it's about encouraging people to just become human beings again and start to enjoy this relationship with your children and with yourself, rather than turning into a transaction, into a job, into a business. There's no products here.
Right, exactly.
We're having human relationships with, and quite privileged ones. I mean, I was saying to James before the show, my son lives in France, and I co-parent with his mum, and we have a great relationship. But I come back and, you know, I've said it for the first couple of days, I'm very low and flat and depressed, and I miss that. The thing about it is you know, in some ways, some parents are listening to me going, no, you're so lucky you get away. Yeah. But what it teaches me that those feelings are how lucky I am to have this aspect of my life, which is being a father to a child who, you know, who we have this evolving relationship, and I'm watching this young person grow and become themselves, and it's a, you know, without sounding too Pollyanna about it, it's a real privilege.
You know what?
Genuine privilege.
No, I say the exact same thing. Right. That rather than doing this engineering thing, like step back and just watch, you know, and like how lucky are we to be able to watch these humans evolve and learn, you know, from a littlest age, learn to move and learn to speak and learn to, then they start to learn to think, and they have their own ideas and their own things that, you know, in my book, I have one of the tips is, you know, your child is not a mini me. And, you know, because we expect that they're going to like what we like, and we're going to kind of push it on them, and then they don't like it. And then we're like, well, what do you mean you don't like it? You have to like it. And I like it. So why don't you like it? And, you know, that happened. And I remember the moment that happened to me with piano and my daughter, and she'd taken lessons for like 5 years, and she just didn't love practicing. And when I was growing up, I had to be told to stop playing because I needed to do other things. And like, I couldn't understand. She's like, looked at me, and this is my wise little daughter again. She said, Mom, I'm not you.
Yes, quite.
You know, and that was like, oh my God, you're right. You're not. And she ended up doing like very different things.
The interesting thing about that is that from an anxious parenting perspective, if they're not like me, I failed. But from a healthy, relaxed parenting perspective, you understand, oh, actually, I've done my job because they are themselves. And they're able to say to me, no, I'm not you, I am me. Surely that is the point of parenting, is to facilitate a situation in which your children go into the adults that they believe they should be, rather than sort of trying to meet your own needs.
Yeah, I also feel like life, especially for children, but even for us, like my mind still goes like this instead of like this, you know, and the kids who get pigeonholed into one sport, you know, and they're doing it all the time, and they're doing it, you know, all year long, and their life is sort of like here, and then it just keeps like that, as opposed to like, okay, you tried this. Do you want to keep doing it, or do you want to try something else? Like exposing them to different opportunities and just what's out there. I think travel is really important too. I think it's important to see that, you know, the world is much bigger than our little bubble that we live in. And, you know, that's, for my children, was very important, you know, when they saw, I mean, my son, when he was 10 and we were in Vietnam in this very poor little village, you know, just because I wanted them to experience what goes on in the world. And a few weeks later, 2 months later, we came home, and my son's like, so do you want to hear my philosophy? And I'm like, yeah, sure. What's your philosophy, honey? And he said, well, the people here in the United States, like, they get things and then they're happy, and then they want more things, and they always want more and more and more. And he's like, those kids in Vietnam, they didn't have anything and they were just happy.
Yeah.
And, you know, he's written many an essay on that throughout his years in school. And like, it made such an incredible impact on him.
Yeah.
It was amazing.
Yeah. I mean, it's beautiful that a child gets that. Because in the sense as well, that's perfect for a child, that sort of worldview, because they can then sort of hover around discovering who they are without the pressure of being something or producing something, and understand that it's, you know, an internal process. So it's beautiful. I mean, it's lovely to hear. It's a real antidote to some of the prejudices I have about the sort of corporatization of parenting that I see happening, and parenting itself has been turned into an industry, and I think there's huge amounts of pressure on parents to be perfect parents, and you have various strategies around how you do this and how you do that and how you do this. And it's interesting for me as a clinician, because I'm thinking about some of the sessions I had today. I had some family sessions. In fact, I told you, I'm sort of, I got it when we had our phone call. I'm just going into family session. Yeah. And one thing that, clinicians can forget to do is come back to why are we doing the work, in the same way that you're asking the question of your parents. Why do you want to be a parent? It seems to me you're saying. Do you want to be a parent because what you want is to produce, rubber stamp a version of your reality onto another human being? Or do you want to be a parent because you actually love your kid and you want to see what sort of surprises they've got in store for you as they grow up, and when they tell you their philosophy and you go, oh, right, that's an interesting, I hadn't thought about that. And I think as clinicians treating families, we forget that the whole point, or we can forget that the whole point is that what a family ideally is a group of people exploring life together, and sharing strategies and sharing moments and sharing love and enjoying, and sometimes not enjoying, being with each other, but finding growth through that. And like as a clinician, I think sometimes I get caught up in this idea, let's just get rid of the symptoms and then, but life isn't just simply about being symptom free, is it? It's got to have purpose and meaning in it.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
I want to give a little plug to my book. I know you hate bugs. You hate bugs. I hate parenting books too. And I will say that for mine, of course. Well, I think what my own experience was I would go to the bookstore, now Amazon, whatever, and the plethora of parenting books out there is anxiety producing in and of itself. Yeah. Then you finally pick one book and you start reading it. And then, like, for me, I would start reading this book and I was like, oh, great, I already screwed up my kids. Like, I already missed the boat. I felt so badly that I and then I would institute new rules and new this. And my husband was like, are you reading another parenting book? Because and I'm yeah. And I would never get through them because they were just too long. And so I wrote this little book. It's here. It has my tabs on it. So it doesn't usually have those little pink things, but it's called Parenting with Sanity and Joy, 101 Simple Strategies. And literally, that's what it is. This is a tip. Ignore the judgy parents. This one happens to say, but it's, respect your child's privacy.
Yeah.
Another little tip. There's a bunch of them and a bunch of different, here's one. It's my version of TMI. Pay attention to TMI, timing, manner, and intonation.
Right.
When you talk to your kids,
yeah.
There's a whole section on food and dining. There's a section on attitude and gratitude. There's a section on life skills, which is one of my favorites. Yeah. Forbidden phrases, like things we shouldn't say to our kids, sometimes surprising, like, what did you do today? How was your day? What did you do in school today? Gosh, if I work a whole day and then I come home and someone says, what did you do today? The last thing I want to do is recite everything I just did.
No way.
Yeah, please.
Absolutely.
So how do we have these conversations? How do we get our kids to talk more? So it's just that little, rules. I have a section on rules and respect, but it's just a charming little, here's another one. Celebrate family milestones together. That one came from when my daughter got her first bed, and moved out of the crib, and how it had to be like, we all had to celebrate that, and so her little brother, was able to crawl in the bed together, and it was a family thing instead of get off my bed, don't do that. It was all when someone lost their first tooth. Like my kids, I don't know if it's just the way they were born or hopefully it had a little something to do with me, but they always celebrated each other's successes, never jealous of each other, were proud of each other, excited for each other.
Well, I mean, I think, you know, I think I really believe in this idea that we create cultures, and it's the cultures that enable things. And it's the same in organizations, the same in families, same in countries, et cetera, et cetera. And sort of, it seems to me that you have a cultural method, and it allows people to blossom and grow. So I have no problem at all promoting your book, having talked to you. If your book is anything like you, it's going to be a bloody good read and really helpful.
Well, I try to keep my tone. It's kind of chill and very non-judgmental. And, I say in the beginning of the book, if you read a tip and it doesn't resonate with you, move on. Don't do it. Try something else. Doesn't matter.
I mean, I think one of the sort of rules I give to people is if you're reading something that makes you feel bad, it's badly written.
Yeah.
Get out, dodge, leave it alone. Only read that stuff that really sort of, fills your heart and your mind with hope, and makes you want to reinvigorate and makes you want to do something rather than something that's whipping you into sort of submission. Unfortunately, we are out of time, Sue.
That went fast.
I know, I did warn you. I warn everybody. They say an hour, and I go, no, it'll fly by. But it does. And it flies by because it's a really fascinating and interesting topic. And I think it's also your approach. I love your approach. It's a real antidote to the quite overbearing, prescriptive parenting models that exist, which I think destroy parents and they destroy children. And we need to stop it. We need to sort of have much more of a sense of getting in touch with what the joy of this stuff is, rather than.
I agree. That's why I say parenting with sanity and joy.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's been really, really lovely to have you on, genuinely, and hopefully you'll come back again at some point.
I'd love to. It was great talking to you.
It was lovely to talk to you. Just stay with us as I wrap the show up. My team will put links to your book. Have you got a website as well? People can get.
I do have a website. I have a podcast. I have lots of.
What's your website so we can make sure people get that?
It's theparentingmentor.com.
Great. There we go. And that'll go out as part of.
Yeah, and you can kind of get everything off of that website.
Great. Brilliant. We'll make sure that goes out with all our information.
And also I'm on Instagram. I try to give a tip almost every day, and that's at the Parenting Mentor. So.
Great. Brilliant. Lovely to have you on. You stay with us. Thanks everybody for joining us. We had yet another fantastic evening, and this time the Wi-Fi didn't drop out, which was really cool. But I'm sort of sad about that because I think Sue would have handled it very well, and she would have done a fantastic show without me. Usually things are better without me, so there you go. Lovely to have you all with us again. I shall see you next week when I'm sure I've got a guest on. I don't know who it is, but I'm sure I've got somebody. I've got a good team. And I hope you all have a lovely evening, whatever you're doing. And bye-bye for now.